The curtain does not look like anything from the inside. That was the first thing I wrote in my personal log when I came aboard the Ardent Meridian 19 years ago. We were 3 weeks into the hydrogen belt at that point, the external sensors already running degraded from the charge bleed, and I had climbed up to the observation blister on the dorsal hull more out of habit than expectation, and looked out at what we were flying through. I expected something. A wall. A color change. Some visible boundary that said, here is where the known ends and the unmapped begins. There was nothing. Gray-brown haze in every direction, the stars reduced to faint smears, the ship's running lights catching tiny suspended particles and throwing them back as a slow, cold glitter. 17 hours of that in any direction. It looked like fog over a flat sea at 3 in the morning, and it smelled, in the recycled air of the observation blister, like ozone and old metal. That was the deep. That was what 19 years of my life had been pointed at. I stopped going to the observation blister after that. Not from disappointment, not exactly. More from a practical recognition that the observation blister was not where the work was, and the work was the point. You came out to the deep because the work needed doing. The view was secondary. The Ardent Meridian was not a warship. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what came later. She was a deep survey cruiser of the Taney's-Combe class, blunt-nosed and wide-bellied, built for endurance rather than speed or firepower. Her hull was 3 meters of composite armor over a pressure skeleton, not to stop weapons fire, but to survive the micro-impact rates in unmapped space, where the particle density could chew through standard plating in 14 months. Her drives were oversized relative to her frame, not for combat acceleration, but because the survey mandate required her to pull herself out of deep gravity anomalies without assistance. She had weapons: 4 rail-mount batteries, 2 ventral torpedo bays, a point defense grid that had never been tested in a live engagement. They were there because the survey charter required them, the same way a geological team carries a sidearm into remote country, not because you expect to use it, but because the regulations say you go armed or you don't go. She looked like what she was, a tool built for a long, lonely job. The hull plating was patched in 14 places where micro-impact swarms had eaten through the original skin. The starboard drive nacelle had been repaired 6 times in 41 years and bore the scars of every repair in the slightly different surface color of the successive patch compounds, a patchwork chronicle in metal. The forward sensor array had been rebuilt entirely at year 27, when a gravitational shear event had stripped the original mounting off the hull during a survey pass, and the replacement was a slightly different geometry than the original. You could see it from certain angles, the subtle asymmetry, the way the port and starboard arms did not quite match. She was not a beautiful ship. She was a ship that had been doing her job for 41 years and looked like it. 40 years out and 40 years back. 80 years of mission, total, with a rotating crew because no one's contract runs 80 years. We came aboard in shifts, the early ones now retired or dead, and we would hand the ship to the next shift somewhere near the turnaround point, which we were now approaching. The mission had been running for 41 years, 7 months, and 11 days when I sat down at the navigation console for what I expected to be a routine pre-emergence check. There were 22 of us aboard, small for a ship that size, but deep survey work does not need a crew of hundreds. It needs specialists, and it needs people who can tolerate an environment where the nearest other human being is, at minimum, 4 years away at best transmission speed. You do not take claustrophobics or people who need a crowd. You take people who can be quiet for a long time without it becoming something else. I had been navigation officer for 11 of my 19 years aboard. Before that, I had been assistant navigation, which meant I ran the sensor sweeps and filed the course corrections and watched Lieutenant Commander Orya do the work I now did. Orya had retired at the handoff point at year 32. He had shaken my hand and said, "It's quieter than you expect out here," and I had thought I understood what he meant. I hadn't, not yet. After 7 more years of it, I did. The quiet was not the absence of sound. The ship was never truly silent. The drives made a low, continuous vibration that you stopped consciously hearing after the first year, but that you felt in your back and your feet every waking hour. The quiet was the absence of events. You could go 6 weeks with nothing to report except routine sensor readings and course corrections with intolerances. You could go 3 months. Once, in year 14, we had gone 5 months without a single anomalous reading of any kind, and at the end of it Oria had written in the log, 5 months clean survey, all instruments nominal. The universe continues to be large and indifferent. He had a dry humor that revealed itself in the log when nothing else was happening. The Ardent Meridian's captain was a man named Davin Ress. He was 63 years old, which made him the oldest person aboard by 8 years. He had come to the ship at year 29, already a senior captain, already with the manner of someone who has been in command long enough that authority is not a posture, but simply a fact of his presence in a room. He was not a large man. He was not loud. In 19 years of working beside him, I had heard him raise his voice exactly once, and that had been at a navigation console failure during a deep magnetic anomaly pass that we had spent 6 weeks recovering from. He had spoken 2 words at elevated volume, then gone quiet again, and the crew had gone quiet with him, and we had fixed the problem. After that, the anomaly pass became a reference point for calibrating other difficult situations. When something went wrong, someone would say quietly, "Is this a magnetic anomaly situation?" And the answer was almost always no, and that was clarifying. He read constantly. Whatever the ship's archive held, he had worked through most of it in 12 years aboard, and he supplemented it with the data packages that came in on the survey broadcast relay, thin packages, delayed by years at this range. But he read everything in them. I had asked him once what he was reading, and he had said, "A history of the Third Boundary Expedition," without looking up, and I had nodded and gone back to my console. The Third Boundary Expedition had ended 80 years ago, and its outcomes were settled history. He was reading it anyway, because reading the settled record carefully was, he had said once and only once, how you learn to read the unsettled one. He was on the bridge when I arrived for the pre-emergence shift. He looked up when I sat down and said, "Vance, how long?" 72 hours at current drive rate, I said. Less if we push the secondary array. The curtain's thinning on the outer edge. I've been watching the density gradient since yesterday. He looked back at his console. "Don't push it. We'll come out at the rated approach. I want a clean emergence, not a fast one." That was Ress. "Don't push it. We'll do it correctly." In 19 years, I had learned not to argue with that instinct. When you are 40 years into the dark with no one to call for help, the value of doing things correctly the first time is not abstract. It is the difference between a career and an incident report filed by someone else. I ran my checks. The navigation array was nominal. The drive systems were nominal. The hull monitors were nominal in all but 3 sections. A persistent microcrack cluster in the port aft quadrant that engineering had been babying for 6 years and would continue to baby until we handed the ship over. The weapons were in standby, which is where they had been for 41 years. The sensor suite was running at 64%, because the remaining 36% had been progressively blinded by the charge bleed inside the curtain, which was expected, which was why emergence protocol called for a full sensor, reset the moment we cleared the density threshold. I ran through the emergence sequence 3 times, partly because that was protocol, partly because there was nothing else to do, and I had never liked the last 72 hours before a significant event. Not because I was afraid of what was on the other side. After 19 years, I had developed a practical philosophy about what the universe might contain, which was approximately anything, and most of it indifferent, but because the waiting was the hardest part of any passage. The actual event, when it came, was always easier than the waiting. That had been true every time I had ever done anything. The crew rotated through. Chief Engineer Bea ran a drive diagnostic and reported everything with intolerance. She had been with the ship for 14 years, which made her the second longest tenured crew member after me, and she had the manner of someone who has spent 14 years learning a particular machine's idiosyncrasies, and now understands it the way you understand a difficult colleague. Not perfectly, but well enough to know which problems to watch and which ones will resolve on their own. She trusted the port-aft microcrack cluster to hold. She had been saying so for 6 years, checking it twice daily, and she had not been wrong yet. Comms officer Rennet pulled in the standard survey broadcast, the automated signal we sent ahead as part of deep emergence protocol, a brief encrypted pulse on 17 frequencies announcing our intention to break cover and requesting any responding signal log within the survey sector, and found nothing on the return sweep. That was expected. We had been sending that pulse every 12 hours for the last 6 months of approach. Nothing had ever answered. We ate dinner at 1800 ship time. We had a good cook, a man named Pravin who had been with the ship for 6 years, and he had made something with reconstituted protein and a spice blend he kept in a sealed tin that he called Marin's No. 4, after whoever had given it to him, and it was the best thing I had eaten in 3 weeks. We talked about small things. Rennet had been reading the historical records of the first Curtin expeditions, 80 years ago, and he talked about what those early crews had expected to find on the far side. There had been considerable academic opinion at the time that the Curtin was a natural barrier separating a populated galactic sector from an unpopulated one, and that emergence would produce first contact within days. It had produced nothing. The first 4 expeditions had broken through and found open dark, unmapped but empty, and the academic opinion had quietly revised itself. They thought we'd come out and immediately run into someone, Rennet said. Instead they came out and found more space, Pravin said, from the kitchen end of the table. The same space, said Dr. Len, our xenobiology officer, a title that had been theoretical for the entire mission, since we had found no biology beyond microbial traces on 2 survey rocks, but the charter required the posting. Just more of it. Maybe this time, Rennet said. No one answered that. It was not a thought any of us put much weight on, but it was not dismissive either. It was the kind of statement you make when you have been doing a job for a long time and you have stopped needing the job to prove itself on any particular day. Maybe this time, or maybe not this time. Either way, the work continued. I slept 4 hours and came back to the bridge at 200. By 600, the density gradients had thinned enough that I revised my emergence estimate to 41 hours. I reported it to Ress, who was already on the bridge. He slept less than anyone aboard, which I had noticed years ago and stopped questioning, and he nodded and went back to his reading. By 1400, 39 hours. By 2200, 31. The curtain does not break all at once. That is the other thing I wrote in my log early on after my first emergence. We had entered the curtain from the near side in year 3, briefly, to adjust a sensor mount, and I had seen my second emergence as well as my first entry. The density gradient reduces progressively. The smear on the stars resolves itself degree by degree over the course of several hours. The first star you see cleanly without the diffusion haze arrives as a kind of shock, not because it is unexpected, but because it is so sharp after so long in the murk. You forget what a clean light source looks like. You forget the depth that open space has, the sense of distance that unobstructed starlight carries. The curtain gives the illusion that the universe is close and thick and contained. The first clean star after a long passage through it is a reminder that it is none of those things. With 18 hours to emergence, I started watching the forward sensors the way you watch a door you expect to open. With 12 hours to emergence, the sensors began their partial recovery. The charge bleed reduced as the density thinned, and the outer arrays started bringing in data at higher resolution. I ran routine sweeps on all bands, long-range gravitational mapping standard, M-spectrum passive monitoring, standard. Mass detection at range, standard. These sweeps had been returning standard results for 41 years. I ran them with the same practiced attention I had given them for the past 11 years in this chair, which is to say, fully, without assumption, the way you read a gauge that has been in tolerance for a decade but which will one day not be. At hour 9, the mass detection array picked up something at extreme range and flagged it. I stared at the flag for 4 seconds before I said anything. 4 seconds is a long time at a navigation console. In 4 seconds I ran the flag backward through the detection algorithm twice, looking for a sensor artifact, a ghost return from the partial recovery, a calibration variance in the outer array. Any of the 23 known false positive profiles the system was capable of generating under curtain-edge conditions. None of them fit the flag's signature profile. Captain. Ress looked up from his console. He read people's voices the way other people read text. He had been doing it for 30 years of command, and he was across the bridge to my station before I had finished the sentence. I showed him the flag. He looked at it for a long time. Not a long time in the way of confusion or alarm, but in the way of a man who is being careful not to move before he understands what he is looking at. The flag read, multiple anomalous mass concentrations bearing 47 relative, range approximately 2.3 million kilometers. Configuration, non-natural. Signature, unknown, no match in survey catalog. Resolution on the mass concentrations, he said. Poor at this range with the array still recovering. I can give you a count within a margin of 12. Low count is 31. High count is 49. Configuration non-natural, he said. Yes. Signature unknown. No match in the survey catalog. Nothing from any logged near-side contact either. I've already run the cross-reference. He straightened up. He looked at the forward viewport. Not because there was anything to see, the range was far too great, but in the way of a man setting his bearing. Continue emergence protocol, he said. Bring the sensor suite to full reset the moment we clear the threshold. I want clean data. Weapons stay in standby. Comms, prepare the standard contact package on all frequencies including xenolinguistic baseline. We do not deviate from charter protocol. Captain, I said, the count. I know the count, he said. He said it quietly. 31 to 49 non-natural mass concentrations at 2.3 million kilometers. Vehicles most likely, vessels of some kind. We had 7 weapons platforms and a point defense grid. Charter protocol Vance. We proceed. I had 19 years of Davin Ress behind me at that moment. 19 years of watching him make the correct call instead of the fast one. I turned back to my console. Yes, sir, I said. The last 9 hours went differently than the previous 41 years. We were quiet, but it was a working quiet rather than an empty one. Ress walked the bridge at measured intervals, checking each station without urgency. Bea ran an additional drive diagnostic and reported no change in status, then went back to engineering and ran it again and reported the same. Dr. Lin pulled up the xenobiology contact protocols from the charter. They had been written 41 years ago by people who expected them to be used within months of departure, and they had the dusty, over-optimistic quality of documents that had never been stress-tested, and went through them carefully, making notes in the margins of her tablet. Rennet prepared the contact package, 17 frequencies, xenolinguistic baseline at the front, the standard astronomical reference suite in the middle, the survey identification block at the end. He had prepared it in drills before. The charter required annual contact readiness drills, but this was the first time he had prepared it for actual transmission, and he went through it with a precision that exceeded even his usual standard, checking every element twice before marking it ready. I watched the mass concentrations resolve, degree by degree, as the density thinned. By hour 6 I had a clean count, 47. By hour 4 I had silhouettes. They were not shapes I recognized. Long-bodied, with forward structures that were heavier than the drive sections, the inverse of human ship design, where the drive mass typically dominates the aft profile. They were arranged in a holding arc, a curved formation spanning approximately 800,000 kilometers. The arc was oriented toward the curtain, toward where we were coming from. They were waiting for us. I reported this to Ress without editorializing. He listened, asked 2 questions: had the formation changed since first detection, and was there any active scanning on our hull? And when I answered no to both, he thanked me and returned to his console. At hour 3, the active scanning began. It was not aggressive. I want to be precise about that. It was a sweep, a broad, low-intensity scan across a wide band, the kind of thing you run when you want data rather than targeting solutions. But it covered us completely, stem to stern, and it ran for 11 minutes without pause, and then it ran again. And again. By the 3rd pass I had the sweep's parameters mapped well enough to characterize it. They were reading mass distribution, reactor output, drive signature, and the electromagnetic profile of our weapons systems. Comprehensive, thorough, professional, in a word, the scan of someone who knew what they wanted to know and was getting it. They were reading us the same way we were reading them. They're getting our reactor signature, Bea said, from engineering. Full cross-section, they know what we're running. Let them look, Ress said. They'll know we're armed, Bea said. The rail batteries and the torpedo bays would read clearly on any competent Massendem sweep. Yes, Ress said. They'll also see we're not targeting them. Let them look. At hour 1, the curtain gave way. Not all at once. It never does. But there is a moment in every emergence where you feel the change in the hull, a subtle shift in the microvibration pattern as the particle density drops below the threshold where it affects the drive field, and the engines sound different, cleaner somehow, less like they are fighting and more like they are simply running. I had felt it twice before in 19 years, and I felt it again now. And then the forward viewport went from brown-gray murk to black, and the stars came back. The stars came back clean and hard and absolute, the way stars look when there is nothing between you and them. And after so long in the curtain, they hit with a force that is not quite visual. It is something your whole body registers, the sudden depth of the space around you, the sense of a horizon that extends in every direction to distances that have no practical meaning. I blinked. I had not expected to blink. And there, at bearing 47 relative, 47 vessels held their arc in the dark. The sensor suite completed its reset in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 4 minutes and 30 seconds of partial data, during which I watched the formation on degraded sensors and noted that nothing had moved. When the reset completed and the full array came live, I had everything. Mass, drive signatures, weapon signatures. Yes, they had weapons, significant ones, larger by caliber than anything in our own inventory, heat output, M profile, the full picture. I had never seen anything like them in my life. No one had. They were not human ships. They were not anything that had ever been logged in any survey record, near side or deep margin. They were constructed things, clearly, the geometric regularity of the forward structures, the symmetry of the drive arrays, but the construction logic was different from anything I knew how to read. The materials read as dense and resonant in ways that suggested a metallurgy we had no catalog entry for. The forward structures I had flagged at hour 4 were now resolvable in detail. They were tiered, layered, almost architectural, not the functional utility geometry of a human warship's bow section, but something more complex, as if the forward hull had been designed to be seen rather than simply to work. The largest vessel in the formation was approximately 4 kilometers in length. Several of them were larger than the Ardent Meridian. The smallest were roughly comparable. "Comms," Ress said. "Send the contact package." "Sending," Rennet said. All 17 frequencies, full xenolinguistic baseline. We waited. Silence for 40 seconds. Then a burst of transmission traffic inside the alien formation. Short, dense, rapid exchanges between the vessels, which Rennet flagged but could not decode. Then silence again. They're talking to each other, Rennet said. About us, I said. Presumably, he said. We waited another 3 minutes, then another 3. I watched the formation on the sensor display, 47 returns in their careful arc, none of them moving, all of them broadcasting internally at irregular intervals. The scanning continued. Another broad low-intensity pass, the 4th since emergence, the same parameters as the previous 3. They were meticulous about it. And then they answered. Not on our frequencies. That would have required them to know our protocols, which they didn't, not yet. They answered on a frequency adjacent to our xenolinguistic baseline, which meant they had analyzed the baseline package fast enough to identify its signal properties and produce a response signal of comparable structure. That was not the response of a species that didn't know how to communicate across contact boundaries. That was the response of a species that had done this before, or at least had prepared for doing it. They had looked at our baseline and understood it as a baseline, understood its function, not just its form, and replied in kind. The response was not decodable, not yet, but it was structured and it was clearly directed at us, and it continued for approximately 4 minutes before it stopped. They heard us, Rennet said. He had the expression of a man who has worked for years at a job he believed in on faith, and now the faith has been confirmed. They absolutely heard us. Get me a working decode, Ress said. Whatever timeline the Charter Xenolinguistic Protocol gives you, cut it in half. Captain, the baseline protocol estimates 48 to 72 hours for initial partial decode. 36, Ress said. We're not going anywhere. I watched the formation while Rennet worked. In the first hour after emergence, the formation did not change. The 47 vessels held their arc with a precision that spoke of either very good pilots or automated holding systems, or both. The active scanning continued, now at intervals. A full sweep every 22 minutes, always the same low intensity, always the same broad band. We were being observed with a methodical patience that I found, in a way I had not expected, almost calming. It was not the behavior of a force preparing to act. It was the behavior of a force that was taking careful stock of what it was looking at. There was something recognizable about that, something I could work with. Patience I understood. The shape of it, the discipline it required. I had been practicing it for 19 years. I had the same thought about them. In the second hour, I noticed something in the formation geometry that I had not seen in the initial assessment. The arc had a natural center, the largest vessel, approximately 4 kilometers, which I had logged as formation lead, but the spacing of the other vessels was not uniform. 6 of them were positioned at irregular intervals that broke the otherwise clean arc geometry, placed in what I could only describe as specific sectors, like outposts watching assigned directions. If the formation was a defensive line, those 6 were its anchors. If it was a receiving formation, something arranged not to fight but to observe, those 6 were witnesses. The distinction mattered, and I could not resolve it from geometry alone. In the third hour, the transmission traffic inside the formation changed character. The short, rapid exchanges that had been running since we emerged gave way to something longer and more deliberate. One signal, originating from the formation lead, broadcast for 11 minutes without interruption. The other vessels were silent while it broadcast. When it finished, there was a pause of approximately 4 minutes, and then 6 signals, one from each of the 6 anchor vessels, responded in sequence. The sequence had an order to it, a formal progression. The 6th anchor vessel broadcast last, the longest of the 6, and when it finished, the formation lead responded briefly, and then everything went quiet. Something's being decided, I said. I know, Ress said. He had been watching the same data for the same 3 hours. Rennet. Any progress on decode? Partial structure map, Rennet said. I can see it's a language, complex syntax, inflected. I can see the grammar is doing something with the signal duration as a semantic carrier, not just the content. I don't have meaning yet. I have shape. That's something, Ress said. Captain, I said, the lead vessel. He looked. The formation lead had changed its orientation. Slightly, 4 degrees in the forward aspect, a fractional turn that pointed the ship's heaviest forward structures toward us rather than perpendicular to our bearing. It was not a weapons targeting adjustment. The weapon platforms were still at their carry angles, not elevated. The drive signature had not changed, no acceleration building. It was something else. A posture change. An orientation. A look maybe. The way a person turns to face something they have decided to address. Hold course, Ress said. We're at station keeping, that's where we stay. 14 hours after emergence, the Savari made a second transmission on our xenolinguistic adjacent frequency. This one was different in structure. Rennet flagged it immediately, his voice carrying something I had not heard from him in 6 years, which was excitement, controlled but present. Captain, this is partially decodable. They're using astronomical references, stars, distances. They're doing what we did in the baseline package. They're building a shared reference system from known physical constants, stellar positions, measurable distances. They understood the baseline's function, I said. Yes, Rennet said. They looked at what we sent and understood why we sent it, not just what it said. They're replicating the method. He paused. Captain, that is not a simple thing to do. No, Ress said. How long for a working decode? If they keep the rate of structural disclosure at this level, 18 hours, maybe 15 if it accelerates. It accelerated. The Savari transmitted 7 more structured packages over the next 9 hours, each one building on the last, each one using the astronomical reference system to introduce new elements of their signal grammar. Every package advanced the shared reference further, from physical constants to spatial relationships, from spatial relationships to quantity and duration, from those to what Rennet identified as categorical structures, the linguistic machinery for classifying and sorting information. They were patient about it. They were also fast. The combination was unusual. In the human contact protocols I had studied, the models for initial exchange assumed either patient and slow or fast and imprecise. The Savari were neither. They were patient because they were precise, and they were fast because the precision was genuine and not labored. I filed another assessment. I was filing a lot of assessments. At hour 22 post-emergence, I watched one of the anchor vessels make a slow, deliberate movement not toward us, but away from the formation, at a distance of approximately 40,000 kilometers, where it stopped and held. It was now outside the arc. It was in a position that I could only describe as exposed between the formation and us, closer to us than to its companions. What are they doing? Bea asked. She had come up to the bridge without being summoned, which she had never done in 14 years, and no one had remarked on it. Making a gesture, Dr. Lin said. She had not spoken for several hours. She had been reading, taking notes, watching. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who has been waiting for a pattern to confirm itself. They put one vessel out in the open between their line and us, smaller than the lead vessel, not one of the anchor ships, a mid-size one. An envoy, Ress said. Something like that, Len said. Or they're showing us they're willing to be vulnerable. One ship away from the group, no cover. It's a posture. It reads as a posture of non-aggression, I said. Yes, she said. Or it's a very clever thing to do if you want to look non-aggressive. It might be both, Ress said. He thought for a moment. It also might be a test. They put one vessel out in the open and watch how we respond. If we move toward it aggressively, they have their answer about us. If we stay put, they have a different answer. We stay put, I said. Yes, he said. We stay put. We watched the isolated vessel for an hour. It did not move. It sent one brief transmission to the formation lead, which the formation lead answered, and then both went quiet. At hour 27, Rennet had a partial decode. Not a translation. Partial decode is not translation. It was a working map of the transmission grammar, the functions of certain signal elements, the broad structure of how they built statements, the categories of reference they were using most frequently. He could not tell us what they were saying with precision. He could tell us what kind of things they were saying, and in some cases the general domain of those things. There's a classification structure in their transmissions, he said. A taxonomic one. They're classifying things. A lot of it is references to other things they've apparently encountered or logged. I'm seeing a high-frequency signal element that seems to function as a category label, and it repeats across different context groups in a way that suggests they're sorting what they observe into existing categories. They're checking us against their catalog, I said. That's my read, Rennet said. And there's a signal element that keeps appearing without a resolved category structure around it. It appears every time the transmissions reference us specifically. Every time. He paused. In everything else I can map, the category element resolves. There's a structure around it that tells you what it's classifying something as. In the references to us, the category element appears and then there's a gap. A structural gap where the classification would go. What does that mean? Bea said. It means, Rennet said carefully, that they have a classification for everything they've referenced so far, and they may not have one for us. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Continue the decode, Ress said. At hour 31, the isolated vessel transmitted directly at us. Not to the formation. To us, specifically, the beam was tight enough that Rennet could characterize it as directionally targeted, aimed at the Ardent Meridian's communication array. Not a broad broadcast, a directed message. Rennet looked at it for 6 minutes before he said anything. This is different in structure from their internal transmissions, he said. It's using the astronomical reference grammar we established together, the shared elements, and the structure is. He worked through it for another minute. I think this is a question. Not in the way we'd ask a question, no question mark. Obviously, that's a written convention, but the grammatical structure is interrogative, open-ended, waiting for a response. What question? Ress said. I don't know the specific content, Rennet said, but the form is asking, and it's addressed to us, personally, not to the curtain, not a general broadcast to this ship. Answer them, Ress said. Use the baseline reference grammar. Reply in kind, same interrogative structure, directed back at them. What do I say? Ask them something, Ress said. It doesn't matter what specifically. The content is secondary right now. The form is what matters. Show them we understood they were asking and that we ask in return. Show them this is a conversation, not a transmission. Rennet drafted it in the grammar we had established, an interrogative structure built from our shared astronomical reference elements, pointed at the isolated vessel. He ran it through the partial decode matrix to make sure it didn't accidentally read as something hostile in their grammar. It didn't. He sent it. The isolated vessel replied within 4 minutes. And the Savari formation woke up. I do not mean they became hostile. I mean that after 27 hours of patient, measured, deliberate behavior, the formation suddenly produced a burst of internal transmission traffic of a density and speed I had not seen since the first minutes after emergence. Every vessel in the formation was talking. The formation lead broadcast 3 times in rapid succession. The anchor vessels answered, each one in sequence and then simultaneously, overlapping each other. The isolated vessel broadcast to the formation and then broadcast to us again. A longer transmission this time, and then to the formation again. What happened? Bea said. We answered them, I said. They didn't know if we could answer. Now they know. More than that, Len said. She was watching the formation with the expression of someone whose field has just become real. They didn't know if we understood what they were doing, whether we grasped that they were asking, specifically asking, not just transmitting. We replied with a question. That proves we understood the form. We weren't just matching a signal pattern. We were communicating. They're updating their catalog, Rennett said. He was decoding the new traffic as fast as he could. They may be discovering they can't, Len said. At hour 36, Rennett had enough of the grammar map to attempt a working translation of the most recent direct transmission from the isolated vessel. He spent 4 hours on it, running it through the decode matrix 3 times, cross-checking every element against the established reference grammar, asking Ress twice for more time and being told he had it. When he came to Ress with the printout, his hands were steady, and his voice was steady, but there was something in the deliberateness of both that told me he had been working to make them that way. This is approximate, he said. Grammar-level accuracy, not semantic precision. Concepts may not translate cleanly, but the core of the message is this. He read from the printout. We have observed the trace of your passage for 31 years. We have waited at the boundary. We have records of your signal emissions going back to your entry point. We have 17 categories for every vessel type we have encountered in our catalogs. We have placed your vessel in none of them. We have placed your crew in none of them. Please state your designation and the name of your authority. Ress read it twice. Then he handed it back to Rennett and looked at me. They've been sitting out here for 31 years watching our survey emissions come through the curtain, I said. Yes, he said. They knew something was in there. They waited to see what would come out. Yes. 31 years, I said. Draft a reply, Ress said. Designation. The survey vessel Ardent Meridian, operating under the survey mandate of the Meridian Compact, Deep Range Mapping Division. Authority. Myself, Captain Davin Ress. Request their equivalent information in return. Rennett drafted it in the grammar we had established, checked it twice, showed it to Len for a xenolinguistic second opinion, and sent it. The reply from the isolated vessel took 19 minutes. Rennett decoded it in 3. Designation. The observation vessel Tursan Pale, operating under the archive authority of the Savari Compact, Boundary Watch Division. Authority. Archivist Admiral Solon Vess, compact of 17 reaches. The Savari Compact has maintained this boundary watch for 312 years. You are the first vessel to emerge from the boundary in our recorded history. You are the first crew of your kind we have encountered. We have opened a formal notation in our archive that this contact falls outside our classification system. We request the terms under which your authority permits passage through this sector. The bridge was completely silent. Outside the forward viewport, the 47 vessels of the Savari Compact held their arc in the dark, patient and precise, and the isolated vessel Tursan Pale floated between us in the open. 312 years of watching a boundary. 31 of those years watching our signal traces drift through the curtain and wondering what was making them. Then we came out, and we were something they had no category for, and their first response, the very first thing they had done, was to check their catalog and report formally that the catalog was insufficient. They had not attacked. They had not fled. They had not adjusted to a targeting configuration. They had scanned us carefully and repeatedly, and they had spent 36 hours building the linguistic infrastructure to ask us our name and our authority, because they had a process for encountering new things, and the process required that information, and they had followed the process even when the process was inadequate to the encounter. There was something admirable about that. A culture that followed its protocol past the point where the protocol fit, because the protocol was still the best tool available. I thought about what that meant. A species with a 300-year boundary watch, with a 17-category classification system, with a formal notation protocol for things that fall outside the system. That was not a species acting on instinct. That was a species acting on doctrine. Centuries of accumulated doctrine, applied with the patience of a culture that thought in timescales that dwarfed any individual's career. And they had reached the edge of their doctrine, and they had said so formally, and asked what came next. "Captain," I said, "what are our passage terms?" He looked at me for a moment. Not because he didn't know, Ress always knew, but because he was deciding how to say it. "The survey mandate authorizes passage through any unmapped sector under the Standard Exchange Protocol," he said. "We offer survey data for free transit. We offer shared chart access for established transit lanes. We offer communication access for ongoing scientific exchange. We do not offer weapons treaties or military arrangements. We're not constituted for that, and neither is the mandate." "They asked for authority," I said. "If they want a weapons arrangement, we can't give them one." "We won't," he said. "We'll tell them who we are, what we're doing, and what we can offer. If they want something we can't provide, we'll tell them what authority to contact. That's what the charter says. We follow the charter." I had been 19 years aboard a ship that followed the charter. 19 years of doing the job correctly even when no one was watching, because the job was the point, and the charter was the shape of the job. Out here, in the dark, with 47 vessels that had been waiting for 3 centuries, that felt like the only reasonable thing to have been. Rennet drafted the passage terms. Ress reviewed them, made 2 small changes in phrasing, and approved them. We sent them on the frequency the Savari had established. In the grammar we had built together over 36 hours. The Savari compact took 4 hours to reply. During those 4 hours, the internal transmission traffic ran at the highest density we had observed. The formation lead broadcast 11 times. The anchor vessels answered, conferred, answered again. The isolated vessel Tursan Pale held its position and was silent for the first 2 hours, then sent a single long broadcast to the formation lead and went silent again. When the reply came, it came from the formation lead directly, not from the isolated vessel. This was the first time the formation lead had transmitted to us rather than routing through the Tursan Pale, and Rennet noted that the signal carried a formal preamble structure he had not seen before in their grammar, longer, more layered, with a repeating introductory element that he characterized as ceremonial. "This is a formal statement," he said. "I think this is the equivalent of a document, not a conversation. The preamble structure is different from anything in the direct exchange grammar. More elaborate. It has a repetitive element that reads as, I don't want to overinterpret, but it reads as a mark of significance, a way of signaling that what follows carries particular weight." He decoded it over 2 hours, very carefully, and read it to Ress in his office with me present. The Savari Compact, in the 44th Assembly of the Archivist Council, acknowledges the emergence of the survey vessel Ardent Meridian from the Curtin boundary on the date of record. The compact acknowledges that this vessel and its crew represent a designation and authority not previously known to the compact archive. The compact acknowledges that the classification system of the 17 reaches does not contain a category adequate for this vessel or this crew. The compact formally notes, under archive seal, that the encounter of this date is the first of its kind in 312 years of boundary records. The compact accepts the passage terms offered by the authority of Archivist Admiral Solon Vess, compact of 17 reaches. The compact requests the contact information of the Meridian Compact Deep Range Survey Mandate for future communication. The compact releases the boundary arc formation and grants free transit. The compact further requests that the following be entered into the survey vessel's record. The boundary watch was established in expectation that something would eventually emerge. We did not know what. We did not know when. We prepared our protocols and our patience. We were not prepared for this. Ress was quiet for a long time after Rennet finished reading. They weren't prepared, I said, after 300 years. They were prepared for everything they had previously encountered, Ress said. They weren't prepared for something that had no category in their records. What were they expecting? I said. He looked at me. He had the expression he got when he was about to say something he had been thinking for a long time. Something that matched what they already knew, he said. The same thing everyone expects when they've spent 300 years building categories. You build the best system you can. You prepare for every variation of everything you've seen. You don't prepare for the thing that isn't a variation of anything. He paused. And you don't prepare for the thing that holds station, answers your grammar with your grammar, and sends a reply saying it was glad you were here. That's not in the catalog. We sent the reply the next morning. It was in 2 parts. The formal acknowledgement of the Savari Compact Statement, which Rennet drafted in their ceremonial structure, and a plain language supplement for the archive record, which Ress wrote himself. The supplement said, "The Meridian Compact Deep Range Survey Mandate is registered with the Survey Authority of the Meridian Worlds. Complete contact information will follow in the attached data package. The survey vessel Ardent Meridian has been in transit for 41 years, 7 months and 14 days. The crew is 22 persons. We have not previously made contact with any intelligence beyond the boundary. We were not carrying expectations of contact on this emergence. We were carrying survey instruments and patients. We are glad you were here." We transmitted the reply, then we waited. The Savari formation began to dissolve over the next 6 hours. Not to retreat. They did not retreat. The distinction mattered, and I noted it carefully in the log. But to reform into a different configuration, an open corridor rather than an arc. The 47 vessels rearranging themselves with the same measured precision they had shown in every maneuver since emergence. The corridor was wide enough for the Ardent Meridian to pass through with comfortable clearance on all sides. The Tursan Pale came back into the main formation and took a position at the front of the corridor. "Guide position," Len said. "They're leading us through." 3 more transmissions came while the formation reformed. 2 were technical, coordinate packages, hazard maps of the sector, density charts for the space between here and the nearest navigable waypoint. This was information that would have taken us months of survey work to compile on our own. They had been compiling it for 3 centuries. They gave it without condition, bundled with the passage grant, offered the way you offer a map to someone who has just arrived in unfamiliar country. The third was a personal transmission from Archivist Admiral Solon Vess, addressed to Captain Davin Ress. Rennet decoded it in full and brought it to Ress without delay. "To the authority of the Ardent Meridian, I have commanded the Boundary Watch for 19 years. Before me, 4 other Archivist Admirals commanded it. We study the records of all 5 watches and see the same entry for 312 years. No emergence recorded. We speculated in private council whether anything would ever emerge. Some believed the traces we observed were geological in origin, complex outgassing from the curtain itself, misread as structured signal. I was not among them. I believed something was inside. I did not know what. I built my readiness plans around everything I could imagine, and I found that imagination has practical limits. I was not ready for something that held station, answered our grammar with our grammar, and sent a reply saying it was glad we were here. I have filed a notation in the archive that the classification system of the 17 reaches requires revision. I expect this will be discussed for the next several hundred years. I will not be alive for the conclusion. You will not be either. That is, I suspect, something we have in common. Ress wrote the reply to Solon Vess personally, and he shared it with me before he sent it. To the Archivist Admiral Solon Vess, Boundary Watch, Savari Compact. The survey mandate I operate under was written 41 years ago. It was written by people who expected contact within months. They did not get it. They handed the mandate down, and the crews that followed handed it down again, and we carried it for 41 years through the curtain and out the other side. I have been on this ship for 19 of those years. My navigation officer has been on this ship for 19 years. My chief engineer for 14. You asked whether we were carrying expectations. We were not. We were carrying instruments and patience. I believe that is what you do when the work is long and the end is uncertain. You carry what you have and you do the work. I am glad the watch held. I am glad ours did too. The survey data we have compiled over 41 years will be transmitted to your archive in the attached package. It is the record of what is inside the curtain. I hope it is useful. He sent it. The Ardent Meridian moved through the corridor at survey approach speed, not rushed, not crawling, the pace of a ship that knows where it is going and is in no hurry to pretend otherwise. 22 people aboard, 41 years of data in the archive, and an entry in the mission log that had never been written before. The 47 vessels of the Savari Compact held their positions as we passed, each one precise and still, the corridor clean and wide. From the sensor array I could see the weapons platforms on every vessel in their carry angles, unchanged from the moment we had emerged. Not elevated, not targeting, held. Most of the crew were on the bridge, which was unusual. We were a small ship and the bridge was not large, and under normal operating conditions only the duty watch was present. But this was not a normal operating condition, and Ress had said nothing when Pravin and the 2 junior engineers and the off-watch sensor team had arrived one by one over the preceding hour and found places at the margins of the room. They stood at their respective walls and they watched the sensor display and the forward viewport, and no one said very much. There was not a great deal to say. The corridor was there, the Savari ships were there, and the Ardent Meridian was moving through it, doing exactly what it had been doing for 41 years. The job. I kept my eyes on the navigation console and the sensor array, running the checks at 2-minute intervals rather than the standard 5, not because I expected anything to change, but because the work occupied the hands and the mind in a way that sitting and watching did not. The formation geometry was stable. No vessel moved. The scanning continued at its regular 22-minute intervals, the same low-intensity broad sweep it had been running since emergence, and I had stopped reading it as surveillance and started reading it as attention. They were paying attention to us. We were paying attention to them. That seemed like the correct posture for the occasion. Bea said quietly, from where she was standing near the engineering console, 41 years. No one responded for a moment. Then Rennet said, 41 years, 7 months, and 16 days. And we come out the other side and there are 47 ships waiting, Bea said. She was not agitated. She had the tone of someone working through an arithmetic problem that has a satisfying answer. 312 years of them waiting. And 41 of us. It matches, Len said from across the bridge. That's the thing, it almost matches. And it did. That was the strange symmetry of it, 2 watches, pointed at the same boundary from opposite sides. One started from expectation and one from duty, both of them running long past the point where the people who started them were alive to see the result. The Savari Compact had sent 5 archivist admirals to this posting over 3 centuries. The Meridian Compact had sent 6 crew rotations through the Ardent Meridian over 41 years. All of them carrying the work forward, one shift at a time, because that was what you did when the work was too long for any one person. I thought about Oria, and the 7 captains before Ress, and the navigation officers before me, all of them sitting in this chair at this console running these same sweeps through the curtain's brown-gray murk. None of them had known it would end here. None of them had needed to know. You do not carry a 40-year mandate because you are certain of the outcome. You carry it because the outcome is worth being uncertain about for 40 years. The Tursan Pale guided us to the far edge of the sector. At the waypoint it stopped and held, and we stopped alongside it, and for several minutes neither ship moved. Then it broadcast a short transmission. Rennet decoded it on the fly. Now, his work on the grammar having reached the point where short formal exchanges came quickly. The watch is ended, the boundary is open, go well. We broadcast a farewell in the grammar we had built over 36 hours. The tercine pale answered in kind. Then it turned back toward the formation. I watched it on the sensors until it was a small return, and then a very small return, and then not a return at all. The mission log entry for that day was 37 words because Res kept the log brief on principle. He had kept it brief for 41 years, 1 entry per day, the same discipline he brought to everything. The notable events entry read, first contact with the Savari compact, 17 reaches recorded at 8:14 ship time on emergence day. Contact proceeded without incident per charter protocol. Passage terms accepted. Transit granted. Survey data exchanged. No casualties. No damage. Recommend formal diplomatic contact at the earliest opportunity through proper authority. He handed me the log to countersign, which was Navigator's protocol on all significant entries. I read it, I countersigned it. Then I went to the observation blister for the first time in years, because we were through the curtain and the stars were back, clean and hard and absolute in every direction, and I wanted to see them without anything between me and them. 312 years of watching, 31 years of tracking our emissions through the curtain, compiling records, running protocols, waiting to see what the traces would eventually become. And when we came through, the thing that unmade their catalog was not the size of the ship. They had larger ships. It was not the weapons, they had heavier ones. It was not even that we had answered their grammar with their grammar, though that had mattered. What they had written in the formal notation, the thing they had said they were not prepared for, was the reply, "We are glad you were here." 312 years of waiting, and the thing that had no category was not a vessel or a drive signature or a weapons profile. It was composure. The simple, practiced composure of a crew that had been alone in the dark for a very long time and had learned, somewhere in those years, not to mistake the waiting for the answer. The work was the answer. The patience was the answer. And when contact came, you answered the hail the way you had always done everything else, correctly, without rush, exactly as the charter specified, because the charter was what you had, and you had trusted it for 41 years, and it had gotten you here. The stars held, we had always been good at that. I stayed in the observation blister for a long time. The stars were very sharp, and there were a great many of them, and the space between them was exactly as large as it had always been, and somewhere in that space the Savari compact was sitting down to write a formal notation that would take several centuries to resolve, and I found that I was entirely at peace with that. Some things take the time they take. You prepare your protocols. You carry your patience. You do the work. Eventually, the answer comes through.